record, and I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully you can see it here in a second. Can you verify that you can see my learning revolution? Laura?
Yes, we do.
I see it. Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the very first episode of Thrive in EDU, which will be on Wednesdays. And I welcome you for the first episode. My name is Rachelle Dene Poth, and each week we'll have some guests and some different conversation topics. And so just if you are going to join in with us every single week, just check out the session description or feel free to reach out to me and ask what it is. I'd love to connect with you. Just as a reminder, the audio and video are off. If you have questions, we'll save some time throughout to connect, and feel free to use the chat to share information, to ask questions. Also, tweet using the hashtag #LearningRevolution. And today, I will tell you that our discussion is going to be about the future of education and different things that we can do as educators to help prepare our students, prepare ourselves. And I do have a guest today, but I'll introduce myself first, and then I will let my guest introduce herself. My name, as I said, is Rachelle. I'm a Spanish and STEAM teacher. I am located outside of Pittsburgh. I've been teaching I've been saying a while. I'm also a consultant and an attorney. And so I love school, love learning. And if anybody is familiar with ISTE, which is the International Society of Technology and Education, I am currently the president, soon to be past president in about a week here, of the Teacher Education Network. And so it's been a really great opportunity for me for the last couple of years to learn about what's happening in education, to specifically focus on helping pre-service teachers, to look at the trends in higher education, just to kind of keep me aware of everything that's going on. I also am an ambassador for some different companies, and I know some people who are joining in are also involved in those as well. And so I love connecting, learning new ideas that I can bring back to my classroom and that can also be shared with others. I'm also an author and a blogger, and have had a pretty busy year. But the thing that I love about it is that I've been able to share not just my story, but stories of other educators that I've been able to connect with through Twitter, through conferences, through sessions like this, in my books, and also from some of my students. And so if at any point you have questions about anything, need some ideas, I will be happy to point you in the right direction. If I don't know the answer, feel free to connect with me on Twitter, on Instagram, or email. And so that is me. And I'm going to turn it over to my good friend, Laura Steinbrink, who I finally got to meet in person a couple of months ago for the first time. So welcome, Laura.
Thanks, Rachelle. That was a crowning moment. I think the first time we met was at the restaurant there at TCEA that night when I rolled in, right? We had dinner. That was super fun. I've been an educator, I'm going to use your words, for a while. And I have at times taught 7 different subjects within 6 class periods. I don't recommend that, just FYI. I am in a small rural district right now, so I am wearing a lot of hats. I not only teach and do the yearbook, I'm getting out of coaching because I have a son coming up into high school this year. So I will be a mom of a basketball, baseball player. So that would be my main duty, but I also am the district technology coach and the webmaster for the district and the communications director, which means I handle a lot of the social media. I've been featured, a lot of my lessons have been featured in various books, and I've contributed to Rachelle's books. And I love tech and integration, and I love to think about where education is going.
And I am overwhelmed when I hear all of the things that you do, because I know you are so involved. But I'm very thankful for the social media connection, because for me, years ago, I was not on Twitter. I didn't understand it. I didn't see the value in it. And now all these years later, I think about all the connections that I've made, the opportunities that I've gotten through those connections, and more importantly, that have come through for my students. And I think, oh my goodness, I wish I had done that sooner. So thankful to have met you officially. We've been friends for, I think, I don't even know now.
It's almost 2 years or 3.
Yeah, almost going on 3 years. And we talk every day. And so I'm happy to have Laura here with me today to talk about the future of education, because she does have so many different experiences and she has a lot of great ideas to share. And so in our conversation today, we welcome you to ask questions, to share your experiences, to interact with each other in the chat, because that's how we all learn. And it's just meant to be kind of an open discussion. And the first thing that I will share with you are, I have some statistics that I think are pretty interesting and help us to kind of, I don't know, figure out what we need to do in our classrooms. And for me, as a language teacher, I can't tell you how many times over the years at conferences or just even at different schools when I would go and do school visits with my other teachers, where students or teachers would say, oh, I had 5 years, 4 years, whatever, of Spanish or French, and I don't remember anything. And that's something that I realized, that not all students are going to go on to become Spanish majors or to become teachers like myself. But I realized at that point that yes, I want them to learn the content, but I also need to do something to help prepare them for the future, whatever that's going to look like when they leave my classroom in our schools. And it's funny, when you look back on your life, it's signs across time. Like, would you ever guess what I'd be doing now based on what I did when I was a kid? And when I was a kid, I played school. I love technology, but I never thought about being a teacher. I just liked to play school. But I took French in high school. I never thought that I would be teaching Spanish and using technology. So it's very interesting to think about that. And for me, in my classroom, I like to think about, what can I do with my students as far as learning opportunities that will prepare them for whatever they decide to do in the future. And so looking at trends and looking at the research and kind of understanding that really helps me to design some specific learning activities for them. And so Laura and I will talk about some ideas that we've used, and would love to hear from you as well about some of the ways that you might be kind of having students be engaged in more active learning or building critical thinking skills or problem solving. But just some interesting facts, looking at 2030, which it seemed so far away, but time goes so quickly. The top 10 jobs in 2010 did not exist 6 years prior to that. So think about the jobs that exist today that maybe even 2 years ago, we never heard of. And the jobs that exist now that maybe 2 years from now, we won't even remember that they existed. Things are changing so quickly. The gig economy is a term that I wasn't familiar with until I realized, okay, gig, short term, people need to be flexible. So instead of companies hiring long-term employees, what a lot of them are doing now is getting independent contractors or part-time. And especially interesting, I mean, the last couple of months with us teaching remotely and so many people working remotely, this has become, for a lot of companies, they're looking at doing this on a more long-term basis because they've seen an increase in accountability and productivity. And so our students are going to need to develop skills that will enable them to be flexible and work in a gig economy, similar to what we've been experiencing in the last couple of months and we'll continue to see. 2020, it's here. So this was actually put out about a little over a year ago. 43% of workers will be freelancers. Do you yourself or anybody that you know work as a freelancer in some other regard? Are you a consultant? Do you have some other type of work? And then STEM, 2022, so 9 million jobs will be available in STEM. And as a Spanish teacher who also teaches technology, what are the things that I can do in my classroom to help students develop those skills? And so before we talk about how we prepare, I'm going to ask Laura if any of those were surprising to her, or are they any things that you also consider when you're creating lessons for your students?
Well, and actually I did do some research on this recently, helping Bunsey create a Microsoft course. We've been looking into SEL, and I know that Forbes often puts social, and they don't call it SEL, but emotional skills or emotional intelligence always ranks in their top 5 here and there when they are posting about what employers are looking for. So as I went to dig up the most recent one of those, I also noticed that technical knowledge has gone down some, and problem solving, communication, critical thinking, and collaboration are dominating fields right now, because it doesn't matter sometimes how much you know if you can't get along and think for yourself. If you can't get along with your the people you have to work with, your colleagues, if you can't get along, you can't think for yourself, then you're not going to have a job very long.
True. And that is, I mean, how many times we have our students come in, if we put them into groups, random or not, and they don't want to necessarily work with certain classmates, and helping them to develop those skills to realize, okay, you won't always have that choice. And it's about listening to each other, developing those relationship skills, because we never know what our situation will be whenever we're doing some work and we have to work with somebody. And I joke with my students in my STEAM class that at some point they may be working with a robot, right? In their field of work, we don't know. But what I find interesting about this graphic, if everybody takes a look at it, okay, 50 years apart, look at the skills that have not really changed in those and the ones that have completely shifted. So if you look, I'll give you 30 seconds to take a look, but look kind of in the middle and see which ones stay the same over the span of 50 years.
And it's funny to see how problem solving was 12 and now it's 2. Mm-hmm. And I just wonder if people were just better at because they had to be back in the first column. Then now we have so many technological advances, we don't always have to figure it out ourselves.
We do. And I'm not sure why reading has shifted, according to this, to last compared to being third in 1970. But clearly the teamwork, the interpersonal skills, and the organization and computation, I mean, the organization stayed the same. Teamwork went way to the top from being 10th. So it's interesting to see the ones that stayed in the center, in the middle of it, the listening, the career development, the critical thinking, and the leadership skills. And these are the skills clearly that employers want. And this was a graphic that I had gotten from Twitter, and also in a book written by Mark Gura, which is called Make, Learn, Succeed. He shared some of these statistics about what are the skills that employers are looking for, and then let's focus in our classrooms, what are some of the activities, whether it's a digital tool or if it's just a strategy, it doesn't have to be technology. How do we help students to develop these skills that they're skills of transfer? So regardless of what they end up doing, if they go into the career world after they leave our high school, or if they go to college, that will benefit them regardless of what they do.
Yes, and I like to tell students that I'm preparing them for any door they might walk through, and they may not even know they want to go in that door or know about the door. That door may not even exist right now, the way the job market is, but you never know when a skill is going to come in handy. So we work on a lot. I
love that analogy, or the conversation about the door. And so let's look at learning experiences. And I'm actually going to minimize this a little bit just to bring it down some. If anybody looks at reports or studies the World Economic Forum, they had this list of growing skills for 2022. So we are not that far away from that period of time, but look at these top 10. And this is what we're going to focus on today, is preparing for the future, looking at what the skills are that are increasing, that are needed, and what are we doing in our classrooms that can help students to build these. And now the other part of this that we have to think about too is, if we are going to start our next school year, and whether we're actually back in our classrooms, or if we are doing hybrid learning, or if we're fully remote or distance learning, what are some ideas that we have that won't be overwhelming, that we can use regardless of where learning is actually officially taking place? And there are a lot of choices out there. I know Laura has been involved in a lot of collaborating. With me, we've connected with students and classrooms in Argentina and Spain. But what happens when we don't have the technology? So lots of considerations that we have to have. And this list is interesting. If you think back to the graphic before, there's the consistency, right? But looking down, Laura, I'm going to put this back on you. Look at number 8.
Mm-hmm. Emotional intelligence. And that's it's a little different when you're doing online learning than in the classroom, but that is a skill you've got to teach students. And when I talk to teachers, and I came up with a system or a framework, not a system, a framework to kind of help build it in so it doesn't replace academics, but it supports them. Because if kids aren't in a framework where they can even understand or listen to you or pay any attention at all to the academics because of something else going on, you have to stop and address that, and then teach them how to address that. And when I talk to teachers, who's with your kid most of the day? I'm not with my kid most of the day. When he's finished with school, he goes to practice. So I see him in time for him to finish up homework, eat, and go to bed. That's not a lot of time for me to work on those skills. Teachers are going to have to help out.
Right. And is there anything, since I kind of turned it over to you with emotional intelligence, and this is an area that you really do a lot with social emotional learning and helping students, and just so much that you share out there. Are there any, I know there are some questions that I've seen people saying, well, how do you help students to develop these skills when we're not in the same physical space? And if we are doing the hybrid learning, do you have any suggestions? And I will also say, anybody that has joined in, feel free to ask some questions in the chat, because we definitely want to make this interactive and get your feedback and involve you in the conversation too.
Yeah, and besides relationship building, because you have to start there. A kid has to trust you in order for them to do the crazy things you're going to suggest to them. But even in a virtual realm, as we may or may not be, my state likes to say pivot right now. We may have to pivot back to online learning. But if we do distance learning, you can still develop relationships with students. And I like the collaboration rooms. You can spin off in Zoom and put them in rooms so they can build relationships with each other. I'm in a small school. They've known each other, most of them, and you may be in a district that does that too. But there are 4 areas that I like to focus on that blend really well with academics, and I can intermingle them with the classroom, or I can do them individually with students, but always start with goal setting. And I like to break it down. You have academic goal setting. So use your I can statements. If you're an I can statement school, use those for goal setting as well. Not just I can learn X standard, but I can do this. I can get through the day. I can get through this period where my boyfriend's sitting and we just broke up. So I break it down to the academic side of goal setting and survival is what I call it, because I don't have to know what the trauma is that kid's going through to know how to help them. If I like last year, I had a senior that broke up with her boyfriend, and they had been together forever, and I had them together like twice during the day, and she couldn't stop crying. So we would set little goals. Can you stop crying for 1 minute? Get your timer out and time it. So you have to start with goal setting, academic goal setting. Can I learn this new content? And according to Hattie's list of what's going to affect learning, his effect size for self-reported grades is usually in the top 5. That alone means a kid needs to, before they've learned the content, they need to decide, okay, I can master these standards. Or if you're in a school like I have points, so I know I can get an A because I can learn this material by this formative or whatever. They just need to set goals, little goals, chunk it up. I meet this goal, I set another. It's just ongoing. And I like to use spreadsheets, Bunsy. I like to give my kids choices of tools to use for that and start tracking, because if they can learn that now, that's what the Navy SEALs do. It's one of the big 4 of emotional skills they do, goal setting.
And I love that you mentioned the Navy SEALs, because you do a presentation that I saw you do at TCEA. And if you wouldn't mind just letting people know about that presentation. And I know that you had written a blog about it too, so we will definitely make sure that we share that out.
Okay. When I was looking into SEL and how I could help my students, because I had several that really, really needed that extra help, and we're not trained. Educators aren't trained for that right now. We just always assume, that counselor can help, but maybe they can't, and maybe the kid doesn't feel like going to the counselor. So I investigated, I did some study, and I came across the History Channel did a TV show called The Brain, and within that they talked to Navy psychologists who developed what they call the Big 4, and their goal was to help increase the number of graduates from the Navy SEAL training program, and without lowering standards, because you can't lower standards for that. And that also gave me the idea, well, we also do not need to lower our academic standards to help them emotionally get those skills they need in order to be competitive or comfortable in the job market when they leave school or college, because you've got to have them in college as well. So their Big 4 are goal setting, Well, okay, they have one called arousal control, but it's deep breathing. It's I'm not going to call it arousal control with my high school, but we call it deep breathing. And that one I usually do individually, but I might demonstrate it once or twice with whole group so that when I do talk to them individually, say, hey, take a deep breath, they kind of know the process. I model it if they see I'm a little, what they call me, salty for no reason, like the class is being good, but I seem to be salty, then I will stop and model deep breathing for them so they can see that that's nature's psychological break. It's how we reboot the brain. And our systems have to do that. And we don't deep breathe very often. If you think about it during a day, we don't. So deep breathing, arousal control, visualization. And that is big. And I discovered when the psychologists were talking about it on that show, that if you picture yourself, and not like a movie camera view where you're looking at yourself, but if you visualize yourself like you're in your body doing it, and you go through something step by step, you're building muscle memory without ever having to do it. And you're creating those neural pathways just as if you were practicing. That to me is huge. And top athletes, not just Navy SEALs, top athletes do that all the time. They watch film and then they go through their head like LeBron James would talk about. I'm going to watch this player do this, and then I know what I'm going to do to respond. If he does this, I'm going to do this. And he thinks it through his head before he ever even gets on the court. And there's countless people who do that are in the, the elite of their game. So that's a skill that has taken me a while to figure out how to use with students, but I go in depth on some blog posts on that. And the other one is positive self-talk. And I do that whole group because we are all bad at that. And my students get to correct me if I say something too. But we talk to ourselves, what is it, like 300-400 times, I don't know what the statistic is. It's like a lot, like, I don't know if it's a minute, but you're always telling yourself in your head, I'm not good enough. I haven't trained well enough. I can't do that. I'm too fat. I'm too ugly. Kids think of all kinds of things they're bad at, and then they just hammer themselves inside their head. And Navy SEALs were doing that. And if they tell themselves that they can't get up over that wall, or they can't get out of the restraints because they get zip tied and thrown into pools, and they have to get out of their restraints, they have to get their breathing apparatus on, and then they have to surface within a time limit. And there are instructors under the water trying to harass them and make sure they can't do it. If they can't master that fear with also having that positive self-talk, then they won't, they fail. So that's a skill they teach them, how to tell yourself I can, which is another reason why I value those I can statements. You can have all kinds of I can statements, but it's very important that kids realize I can do this. Maybe not at the moment, but I can do this. So I like to take it a little bit beyond the yet, but they just need to know they can. So those are the big four that I work with kids daily when I can, and how it's going to look virtually will be a little different. Fortunately, I had it in place by the time we hit that in this past year. But right now we think brick and mortar, but if we end up not brick and mortar, then it's going to take some work to get that virtual.
Yeah, and that is a lot of the things that I've been reading is really the focus on, how are we going to do school? What's it going to look like? Social distancing and all of the requirements that we have for getting school started. But the big focus on the support that our students need, especially when it comes to social emotional learning, but even just for life. There is the overlap with those skills. And if anybody goes to the castle.org site to see the breakdown of them and how those connect to the skills that our students need to build for the future. We keep saying for the future, they need to build the skills now. And even just listening yesterday, people, trying to shift away from saying 21st century skills because we're now in the year 2020, but it's something that we've been talking about for years, and that's just become the terminology for it. But even with terminology for social emotional learning, some didn't necessarily, when I first heard about it, I thought, I'm not familiar with this, but in fact, it's some things that we're already doing. We just don't necessarily always know the name for them or the breakdown. And so learning about them and how they do benefit students for learning and prepare them in the future when they have a job and they're trying to complete a task and they're failing. And what do they do with that frustration? And how do they set new goals? We definitely have to prepare them with those skills. So critically important, even though it was number 8 on the list.
Even though. And it helps trauma inform too. And I don't have to know their trauma to know that I can help them with, and you can buy self-affirmation cards. You can have kids make those, and you can hand them a deck when they're really struggling and let them read through them. I used to think they were hokey. I don't anymore.
Well, yeah, when you see it in practice and you get the
Yeah.
feedback and have that, then you know for
Then
sure.
you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to the 2022 skills outlook, and I'm not going to share the screen right now, but just going to throw the first one out there. Analytical thinking and innovation. And when we hear the words analytical thinking and innovation, if anybody wants to drop in the chat, but innovation for some people is a scary word. You think that you have to do something that's, I don't know, just absolutely amazing or discovering something, but in reality, you're just doing something different or that's new or something in a slightly different way. Like you're tweaking something that you already do. For our students, giving them an opportunity to create something, great ways to do that. Project-based learning, Genius Hour, STEAM, STEM, makerspaces. I mean, anybody, you can share your experiences with that. We'll talk a little bit more about that because we're going to give you all a task. But second one was active learning and learning strategies. Now this one, thinking about if our schools are in a different structure, how do we engage students in active learning? What do we do? What are some ways to get them moving if we have some type of restriction or if they're learning from home? Any ideas, Laura?
Well, yes, for one, and I just finished an ISTE course of mind course called the Learning Sciences. And I am big on dual coding, and I always teach my students about dual coding. Well, I teach high school, but it wouldn't matter what level I taught. I always tell students the why, so that they will understand why we're going to do something, why it might help them. Now, obviously, I would break it down differently depending on the level, but with high school, I just tell them, this is brain science, and this is what dual coding is. It gives your brain two ways to receive that information. And if you're receiving it in two ways, then you're going to have a better chance of remembering it. That is also a skill they can use in college. I had my college daughter use sketchnotes, which is a form of dual coding. In her college classes, she was having trouble with one. So bring your notes home, take those notes, pick out the key points, sketch note those. You do not have to be an artist. You can just make shapes to put them in. Research shows that the graphic organizer is already functioning with dual coding because just those shapes on the ones you pick can help kids remember because you're putting text together with that shape. So online, I've been thinking about that. And during that course, it did talk about visual note taking, but it flipped it around. When we teachers are presenting our materials, so think about this, Rachelle, how many presentations did you do to your kids online that they had to go through? I did not think about making them dual coding friendly personally. Did you? I was like, oh, it's not just something for students. If I get the image and then add the text, not like 1,000 words, but pick out those key points and put them with those images, those kids are going to have a much better success of learning that. And I can do that in person and I'm going to, from now on, all my slides will be dual coding friendly for students to help them process. And it doesn't just have to be text and image, it can be sounds because that's another way we receive information.
Good point. Yeah, all of the different things that we have to reconfigure, reconsider, and problem solve as teachers. I mean, we have to be practicing and evolving our skills in these areas as well. But before I forget, I did want to drop into the chat the link to that World Economic Forum. It was a report, and that's where I got these, the top 10, which I'm going to go back to sharing on the screen in a minute. But I wanted to throw some ideas out there before we looked at the rest of them and then talked about some good strategies to use for preparing our students for the future. But we have a lot of things to consider, right? We can ask students what they're interested in. We can look at the trends in the world for work. I mean, right now, that's tough because of everything that's going on. And so it's kind of hard to decide what's going to happen with work if we have students who are juniors that are thinking about entering the workforce in, say, 2 to 4 years, if they go to college, or if they take a year off or whatever they do. It's hard to predict. So how do we start? Well, we can look at the skills over the past 10, 20, 30, or even 50 years and look at like that chart from the Fortune 500 and kind of predict We can also look at some of the emerging trends, which I know you use some of these things too, the augmented virtual reality, we have artificial intelligence. But then I don't know if anybody here has ever done this, but I start to think about how many things have changed, even just in the past 2 years or 5 years, and then going way back until my childhood. And this might show age, but just think about, I mean, for me, when I was younger, I would go to bookstores, I would go to record stores and sit down and just look at records, look at books, use it as a place to study or to just, I don't know, have some coffee. But now, I mean, I don't know about your areas, it's kind of hard to find bookstores. And even when it comes to books and things, I mean, how many people are actually still buying the actual book as opposed to getting the digital version, or looking at newspapers? I used to love to get the newspaper when I was a kid, read the comics, but I've noticed now, I mean, it's smaller, right? Does anybody in here even get the newspaper anymore? Or do you read it online? And so much technology, and it's like, where do you begin? And then you start to wonder, what will be replacing humans in terms of the work that's being done? And automation, what impact is that going to have on students? And like, there's just so many questions. So we have to kind of, I guess, clearly be prepared for the unknown, which that's kind of familiar right now, right? Yeah. Because we don't know a month from now, 2 months from now, whenever our school year starts. And how do we prepare when you don't know what to prepare for?
And that's why I think when we look at those lists that you showed, those skills are now problem solving. Mm-hmm. I don't know how to do this. Can I figure it out? Can I teach myself? Active learning. We have to get it out of our heads, and educators are the worst. We think that, well, my district will provide all the PD I need. We need to stop thinking of education as something that's provided and think of it in more terms of, this is an opportunity. I need to go out and get that. My son does a great job of teaching himself anything he wants to know, and he goes to YouTube. He does his own research. He hates school. He doesn't like school. He doesn't do anything well in school without a lot of grief from his parents, but he can teach himself anything. So there are kids that are super smart, and I think my son was going to survive better than theirs, just based on that fact. They have to be handed the information. He knows how to go get it, and that's key.
Yeah, that it's challenging, and I'm sure just even now in the last couple of months, having him at home and with you, and just trying to balance all of that out. But I mean, it's a learning opportunity for all of us, and I'm sure an appreciation for what you do as well, and for you, for him, and seeing like both sides of it as a parent. But going back to this list, so we had the active learning, and just looking at number 3, creativity, originality, initiative. Okay, so we're talking about your son he does it on his own, right?
Yeah, anything he wants to learn, he learns it. So I'm always telling his teachers, and that goes for us too, everyone, if we can tap into what they want to learn, that will help us move that needle where those kids are in it. And also that innovation is scary, but think of it as it could just be doing something, taking something old and using it differently, taking a familiar tool and using it differently. It doesn't have to be like brand new from scratch. And I think that's where a lot of times we get hung up, because we think, oh, I'm not innovative.
Right.
And taking initiative, that's huge. Kids think if they see trash on the ground, they don't have to pick it up. Initiative. You do things that you're not told, and you show employers that you can do things without being told. That's big too. And when I interview kids for yearbook, they have to have initiative. And that's something we can teach our kids at least about. Whether or not they practice it with us, that's a whole other thing, but it is important.
And then technology, design, and programming. And I know in my school, the students all have rotations in the 7th and 8th grade. So they get opportunities to engage in activities with STEM or STEAM. Some of them get involved in coding or do animation with Alice programming, but every student gets an opportunity to at least explore some things. Like in my course, which is about emerging technology, I also focus on the basics. We go back and look at old technology. We talk about digital citizenship. We look at coding and programming, and really give students an opportunity to kind of build and design and predict what they think technology will be like. For me, it's fun because when I think when I was their age, how different the world was. They're all on their cell phones. I mean, we had one, maybe two house phones in our house. There wasn't call waiting, and just explaining to them, yeah, like people work hard and they don't always have success the first time or the 10,000th time in some cases of things that we've seen over time of creations and designs. And I mean, there's a lot of famous stories out there about failures, but giving students an opportunity to create critical thinking, that was always an area that it was tough for me at first. And I don't know, I mean, do you have any really good tips for activities that we can all do as teachers for helping students to kind of build those critical thinking skills?
And that is sometimes hard for us to think of. So start with this. Is the question I want to ask students or have them answer, can they click it on Google and then find the answer right away? Okay, so it's not going to be high level of critical thinking if it's easily out there. So the next step, are there two parts to this question? Can they maybe figure this one out pretty easily, but step two is a little harder. So if you embed it with a few layers, then that gets it a little more meaty. You want it to be, and I explain this to my students too, we want it to be a little out of reach and, you know, not the low hanging fruit and not so high that I'm not even going to try to get it. But it needs to stretch us just a little bit. And that is a balance that is pretty fun for us educators to walk a lot of the time. It's got to be in our thinking when we're planning.
Absolutely. And connecting right with that one is the complex problem solving. Just even in looking at teaching a language, sometimes trying to think, just with an example, augmented virtual reality and those types of topics, I wasn't doing those things in my Spanish classes because I didn't think that I could. And
Right.
opening up new ideas and bringing things in and creating problems for my students when it comes to verbs. And I mean, we have to be really creative, but it's hard for students to try and solve a problem, whatever the course is, and to not be able to come up with an answer easily, because they can't look at Google for it. And like,
Right.
how do I get to this answer? And I've been working on it. I'm getting nowhere, and it's frustrating. And I've experienced it, and not just when I was a student. I mean, even as a teacher doing my own work, that struggle is tough sometimes, but it's a good reminder for us as teachers of what students feel and to kind of how to help them work through that, I guess.
Yeah.
Do you see the same?
I do, and we are not anti-Googling any answer, because I do believe that as a resource, students also need to know how to do and to tap into. And when I am doing web design and I run into an HTML coding problem, there's somebody in the world who has shown everyone else on the internet how to do it. It's just up to me to find it. And sometimes that takes patience. So I guess we could come up with answers that are eventually Googleable, but they just need to be complex enough that kids have to think through them, work through them. But yeah, I see that even when in my own learning, because I tend to go out and try to learn things myself. I don't wait to be taught. If I need to know it,
Right.
it's like necessity, the mother of invention. If I need to know it, I'm going to go find out.
I'm the same way. I like to kind of work through it. I've asked the students, which that's not something I used to always do, but if I get to a point where we're using some technology and I can't figure it out, I will ask them. But I love that because it gives them the opportunity to become the leaders, which is something they need to develop their leadership skills, and they feel valued, and it's fun for me to learn from them. And I think they're always amazed whenever they teach us something, because they think we know everything, but
And even when I'm working with staff on district technology, I was working with elementary teachers last year. We were going through the SAMR model and looking at how to do substitution, augmentation, and I don't know how far we got, actually, if we got past that. But while we were doing that, I was showing them a new tool, and preschool teacher had asked me a question, and she needed it to do something that as a high school teacher I have never tried, thought of, needed to. And so I didn't automatically know how to do it. It might have been with Seesaw. And I'm like, I don't know. Let me think about that. And the other kindergarten teacher is like, You mean you don't know how to do everything? Well, no. And I have someone else in my classroom, kids are always coming up with, oh, I figured it out. Yay. And then I make them show everybody else.
Yep.
They
And
get to do it either.
that's the best thing. I had a couple of students one time that we were working on doing some coding, and I knew enough, but I didn't know it all, which was
Right.
fine with me. I wanted them to kind of take it and own it and lead and run with it. And a couple of students were asking me questions, and I just kind of tried to play it off a little bit. Like, yeah, there's an answer to that, and you just got to try and figure it out, hoping that they would figure it out, because I really didn't know. But then I noticed a few other students were flying through. They had been creating so many different things. And one day after school, they were walking past my classroom, and I called them both in. And they thought they were in trouble and had detention or something. And I said, well, no, why? And they said, well, because we're always getting in trouble. And I said, well, the reason I wanted to talk to you is that I noticed that you were really enjoying what we were working on. You were just actually helping your classmates. And I wondered if you wouldn't mind helping me and kind of be peer tutors and work in our class period and just answering questions. And they were amazed. They said, we have never been asked to help in that way. We've always just kind of gotten in trouble. And I said, well, you know what, here's your opportunity, because I've seen how much you enjoy this, and you are already just reaching out before I can even get around the room. And I said, that's great. I said, I would love to have you two do this. And it was just a great way for me to give them an opportunity and for them to connect with their peers and just see that they did have these strengths. And it was all about like building relationships and everything. And so there was a lot of other benefits beyond them building these coding skills. It kind of evolved over that. And so I always love telling that story, because just the looks on their faces, because they thought they were in trouble, when in fact, I really wanted them to help me, and especially their classmates. Do you have similar students that kind of take the lead in that way, or do you usually have to ask them to?
Well, I help them too, but it's one way you can build student leadership, and those are skills. And it's usually when you're doing tech, it's sometimes it'll get the kid that doesn't ever get a platform like that, is not the popular kid, not whatever. So I love that. And when I started my eSports club, which if all of you listening from now and in the future, if you don't have one in your school, consider that. NASEF, which is the North Atlantic, and they will give you the games, and they will give you curriculum, so don't panic, and you don't have to compete. You can just have a club. But when we first started with that, and we start our team and we start building those leadership skills, I was surprised. I did have a few athletes, because all those students love video games. Mm-hmm. So I did have a few athletes show up, but then I had those quiet kids I've never heard talk in class before, unless I'm just like forcing those monosyllabic conversations with them. Yes, no, yes. And so I get them in esports, and they come alive, and they're animated, and it's amazing. There are careers for this. They're called shoutcasting. There's graphic design. There's all kinds of things that once I get them hooked, I can tap into. And some programming, but mostly it's stuff like you don't even have to play games to come in and be a part of that club and have a job. And it's super cool to watch leadership bloom.
Yeah, that is, and esports is an area that I didn't really know that much about, but a couple of recent conferences they had in the expo hall where they were doing the live competitions, and there were a lot of presentations on it. And so I did start to learn more about it. And of course, I knew that you were doing this. So I do see that the potential to build a lot of these skills, that can be a way to do that.
And it's collaborative. Right. Ladies and gentlemen, those games that we play for esports, and that even Fortnite, that kids just play on their own, they get paired with random people, and they have to function as a team. And FYI, if you want to sound cool, those are called randos. Not anybody just somebody that gets put on your team is a rando. That's their slang. But I am amazed. My son has been learning League of Legends, because that's the league that we did, the game that we competed in last year. So he's been learning it, because you have to be in high school. And he's like, Mom, this is really hard, because it's not just that I have to know my level. There's 3 levels in the game. So you're either playing top, so it's like a map. So you have to know where you are on it. So you're either at the top of the game map, or you're playing middle, or you're playing at the bottom. So they have it all divided, like the jungle and the mid and then the top. And you can't just do your level. You have to know what your teammates are doing. So they have to communicate. And we had issues with that. You have to know how to communicate. You have to know how to work together. There's usually a leader will emerge and he starts giving, hey, I need you to go over here. I need you to do this. My son's like, I get tunnel vision, Mom, and I just wipe everybody out. And then I look around and the rest of my team's dead and then we're done because I get killed because you can't ignore everybody else on your team. It's not an individual sport. And we always think of it that way. We think, they're just playing video games. They are actually learning some job skills.
Yeah, and that's something, I mean, like I said, it was not anything that I knew of it, but now that I know more about it, I see all of these different possibilities and the benefits of it. But initially I did think, okay, they're just playing games, but.
Right. That's what it seems like. But and unless you point that out to them, they won't honestly know they're doing that either. They won't know that they're learning job skills, but they do understand what they have to do to play that game. So in turn, we can do that for our students in the classroom. We can have them collaborate with people they don't know. They do it online all the time.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. We can do it.
Yeah. And so we've covered the emotional intelligence, and then just the last two, the reasoning, problem solving, ideation, and then systems analysis and evaluation. And these, of course, the growing skills. And now looking forward to 2022, thinking we have about a year and a half, if we have students who are going to be entering the workforce in our classrooms. I'm going to stop sharing because I'm going to pose a question to see if anybody can drop ideas into the chat to come up with, let me think here. What do you think, Laura? Five sound good? 5 ways that we can create learning experiences, or maybe it's a tool, maybe it's a strategy, a method. What are 5 ways that you think could address all of these skills, or maybe even just a few of them? And we'll pause here for like 30 seconds.
Start with 1.
Yeah, I know. I was going all out for the 5, but
5's a lot.
It is, but
1
even
to 3.
1 to 3, yeah, drop an idea in the chat, and it doesn't have to be anything involving technology, right? It can be anything, and I'll throw an idea out there. In my school, we have one of our teachers who teaches in the business department years ago created a course that was initially sports and entertainment management. Over the years, it has changed names and it's focused more on entrepreneurial skills and finance. And I think she actually ended up breaking that into 2 classes. But the reason she created this class is because she was seeing that students that she was coming in contact with were either not sure if they wanted to go to college, they weren't really sure about what they want to do for a career, and they kind of had a lot of different interests. And so she decided to come up with this class that would help them to build some different skills, where they were doing things like planning events or learning about finances, just a big mix. And in the course, like in our school, they would have to plan, we would have maybe an event with our school where they would have teams, and some people would be responsible for creating the presentations or the flyers to put up in the school, and some would do the foods, and some would do all the scheduling and kind of monitor all that. And they had all of these different roles to play. In each different event, she rotated the responsibilities. So throughout that course, the students had the chance to work in all of those different roles. And at the end of the year, they would be able to, if they wanted to, they graduated high school, they could go out and get a job and do a lot of different types of work because they had an experience where they were planning events or they were problem solving and doing all of these different collaborative fun things that she had planned. But maybe you have students create a business. So based on whatever content you teach, think of a topic or something. So let's say students are studying, I don't know, 18th century. Chances are they're probably not going to have a social media presence. So what would they do? Have them problem solve and think, be creative and come up with some type of a way that they could share what their business is in public when we don't have the current technology that we have to do that. And then maybe instead the next phase of that, because we're going to kind of think about it, evaluate it, and then move on, is have them go to a different place or to a different time period. I don't know, just throwing out some random ideas. But when you change some of those variables, it gets the students to keep thinking about things, being creative or problem solving, or maybe they have an idea and then you throw a curveball to them and say, oh, wait, no, you don't have any money to do that. So now what do you do? So there's one random idea. I don't know if anybody else has one or if Laura has one to share.
Well, I taught a graphic design, I think it was called desktop publishing, graphic design class in junior high at a previous district. And you need an authentic audience. Really, with anything we do, if we can give kids that authentic audience, then that, will help them level up their game and get more proficient and more passionate about it, and really want to do well and give you a better product. So I would also teach them about authentic audiences and the customer being right. So in my desktop publishing class, anybody in the school having any kind of a function could come and say, hey, Ms. Steinbrink, I need programs for this event. Here's the information. And then all the students would work on it and come up with a design to give, and then the whoever ordered it, whatever teacher or coach or administrator wanted the programs, they got to pick the one that got used. But everybody had to submit an entry. And so they didn't always agree with, okay, he picked mine, but now he wants me to change this, and that's going to look dumb because it should look like this. Yes, but you're not the customer. You're providing a service. You will do it how they want you to. Or Johnny gets to do it.
That's a good one too. Also thinking about real world experiences for our students, looking at project-based learning, which is an area that I honestly thought that I was doing for a long time. Then I realized that I was just doing learning based on projects, and it was a very linear process for my students. Here's the requirements, here's what you do, end product, okay, move on. But then once I learned the difference and had students investigating different topics and really connecting with things that were happening in the world, what a difference for their learning, especially in building a lot of these essential skills that they need, and just exploring something that's interesting to them. And then of course we know when it's interesting and it's meaningful, the learning just goes way up, the engagement, the motivation. So project-based learning, great idea. Also with some of the different, like Genius Hour we mentioned, and even just with clubs, with organizations. I don't know about any of your schools, but in my school, we have Model United Nations. So students work together and they represent, and they study a country, and they go with other schools and they have a topic to debate. So it's kind of like a debate group, but also focused on world issues. It's very interesting for me because in my class, when they do project-based learning, often the students will come in already knowing their topic from my class because it's something that they learned about by that other experience. And I've been so impressed over the years to see their growth, especially when it comes to leadership, their confidence, their collaboration, their communication, problem solving, all of these skills, because they've been involved in clubs like that. And so even like the eSports that you mentioned, even with yearbook, having requirements, those types of things that we offer our students.
And deadlines.
And deadlines. Yeah. So it doesn't necessarily have to be specific to a course that we teach. It's just opportunities, whether they're activities, even connecting with the community, giving students an opportunity to engage in place-based education. If anybody is familiar with it, Laura, I know you're familiar with place-based.
We even have a really cool program in our area, and it's called GoCaps. I don't remember what all the letters stand for, but if you don't have something like this in your area, it would be worth your time to try to find people to set that up, if not yourself. But kids can be in that program, and let's say it takes the first half of the day or the second half of the day, and they get to pick a career track. So let's say you do medical. Well, they have a few on-the-job lessons, like they meet with some people who talk to them about what it's like to go to work, and here's things, and then they take them on experiences. So you might be going to the chiropractor's office and working for a chiropractor for this many weeks, and then they switch you to like a hospital, and you get to work in this department for this many weeks. But they try to show you, if you're in the medical track, different sides of that, and give you experience on what it's like on the job. Mm-hmm. And that has just been an amazing program for our kids to get to do that.
Oh, absolutely. Anytime students can connect with, their community or job shadowed. I know now with schools being closed that has been like, what do you do? But fortunately yes, with virtual, they have mentors, different programs, they're doing virtual tours. There are a lot of options out there, which technology is not always the answer. It has to be focused on like, what's your reason? What's it going to do differently? The why. But when we can leverage it to open up these different opportunities for our students, then it makes a big difference. And so we're winding down the hour here, but I'm just going to leave you with a couple ideas. So thinking back to those top 10 that we talked about, what are some ideas that could address almost all of these? I would say project-based learning, if I was going to rank it, because you can have students build critical thinking, problem-solving skills, taking initiative, of course, because they're going to decide what they're going to study, how they're going to share their learning with their peers, and then they're presenting, you mentioned before, they have to have an audience, a public audience, and then they're developing their emotional intelligence because they're understanding, depending on what they're focused on, is it a society issue? Is it a global issue? Another thing that's good is coding, which is not just good because they're building these technology skills, but also it's helpful for building social emotional learning skills. So I would say coding. STEAM makerspaces are great. We just mentioned the place-based learning, and okay, that's 4. So anybody want to throw out a 5th one? And I could type these in. So
I was thinking of designed thinking, but a lot of those are very similar to project-based or UDL. So those are kind of already the same. Yeah, I'm looking to see if anyone else has a suggestion.
I know, I'm dropping some in the chat right now. So I'll say project-based learning, coding, STEAM or STEM makerspaces. Those type of activities are always great because students, if they're designing things, they're going through the whole process back and forth. STEAM, how about Genius Hour?
Yeah, Genius Hour, and even Shark Tank things, where kids have to come up with an idea and then they have to pitch it. So teaching kids how to do that is always going to be a good skill, like the elevator pitch, or the Shark Tank is a little more in depth, but those are always good skills to have. And while I'm thinking of it, I actually have a Train Like a Navy SEAL presentation here on the Learning Revolution.
Oh, that's right, you did.
People can watch. I did do that one here. So you can watch that, and we can drop the blog too.
Yeah, that's great. I forgot that was the one that you had done because I joined in that one. Yeah, so everybody should definitely check out the recording of that one. Well, thank you, Laura, for joining in, and for everybody else for joining in today for the first episode of Thrive in EDU. We'll be talking about a lot of different topics. I mean, today it was future of education, but also things that we need to kind of keep in mind now, especially as we're moving toward the new school year. But all of these ideas are things that can be done in our physical classrooms, but also done in the virtual space. Sometimes we just might have to be a little bit creative in making it happen. And of course, making sure our students and their families have the access and support they need. But we don't have to do all of them, right? You just have to pick one idea. And I know, just start with one, see how it works, get feedback from your students, and dive right in with them too.
Yeah. And don't be afraid. You don't have to be the expert. Let them be the expert. Have a basic knowledge, get them started, and let them go.
Right. And the best thing is to take a chance too. And I did some project-based learning. I tried something for Genius Hour and it didn't go that well, but it was good for me to laugh with my students and say, well, okay, so I don't know how I can fix this. What do I do? And I'm frustrated and it's not working. And for them to see that we feel the same things that they do too, and to have that support for them. So,
and to model how we handle that is very big. Let them see.
So important. They're always watching. Even when we don't know, watching and listening. So, well, thank you, everyone. Next week, I will have 2 guests, and I hope you will join in next week. I won't tell you what the topic is yet. I'm going to keep that. We'll wait a little bit, but we would love to connect with you. Check out Laura's recording for her presentation on the website. You can get that, and her blog site as well. We'll make sure that it's in the session link too, with other information for this one. But we will hang out here if you have any questions. We appreciate you listening to us and joining in on the first episode, and hope you have a great rest of your day wherever you are. Thank you.
Thank you. That was super fun.